They're getting it from Hal Draper.
Yeah.
Hal Draper opening up with both barrels against the Blankiest once again.
These people deserve it, Dan. They're subhuman. They're sickos. I think I'm just gonna start instead of using socialism from above or socialism from below. Everyone I disagree with is either gonna be a Blanquist or a Jacobin.
Yeah.
You're a fucking Jacobin.
And sometimes it's like Jacobin.
You Jacobinian. Oh, Jacobin. Oh no.
Sometimes it's Jacobin, and sometimes it's what's Jacobins, I suppose. Yeah. Got to not say Jacobites.
Jacobite. Yeah,
There's far too much
exactly.
confusion. I've got confused with that one in the past. We should write a reading on the Jacobites, and then halfway through realise it's not the Jacobins.
Wait a minute. I can't decide if I'm hot or if I'm cold. So there might be a lot of rustling today.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Are we on?
We are on. I think. Yeah. Yeah. No, we're on. We're on.
I heard that that baseball team, what you like, made it to the playoffs once again.
They did.
Which
Yes.
is a bit of a formality at this point.
Yeah, it is. Still one game behind the Giants, which is so frustrating because it's like, I mean, you don't care, but it's like the Giants weren't supposed to be good, and they've been the best team in baseball, and it's just like, I hate them.
Nice. My brave, beautiful Giants.
The bastards. I mean, it was so frustrating. Like last night, the Dodgers were about to win. The Dodgers won, and then basically, like as soon as an RBI went in that like guaranteed that we were going to win, the Giants, who were down, scored a couple runs, and they won their game again too. So it's like there's still this one game gap with only
Just
like a
toying
week
with
or
you.
two. Yeah, it's mad, man. It's so bad. And it's okay. I'll stop on this soon, but it's like so maddening
Jack has
because
been losing
like
sleep.
it's so maddening because a couple years ago when the Dodgers lost in the World Series, and it was because the other team cheated, Houston. Like that made me realize like, oh, this is what it actually means to dislike a team, right? Because it's like I had to like kind of I dislike the Giants. But it's like for no other reason that like we're just rivals. But it's like, wow, I actually dislike them. But now it's like, oh fuck, no, I actually do hate the Giants. They're like better than the Dodgers. God damn it. What are you gonna do? Anyway, sports. Yeah. In it. You know what I had yesterday, Dan? Not yesterday. 2 days ago. I felt depressed about things for the first time in a while.
You mean like the state of the world?
State of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was mainly about climate. I wanted to bring this up just because I think a long time ago we talked about like the difference between like anger and like what emotions are the most like useful to a socialist movements, you know? And I was talking with a guy that I work with, and we were kind of just talking about mental health and stuff, and he was saying that, you know, like depression comes up a lot and blah 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, you know, I think instead like I don't really get depressed a whole lot. I get like frustrated and angry and like really mad at things that don't make any sense. It was the first time in a long time, I think, the other day that I got felt a little defeated. And it was weird. It was like almost like a unique experience just because I was like, I don't know, I was just thinking about like the trajectory of like loss of farmland and like the possibility of famine in our lifetime. And that was starting to freak me out. But it was just weird. It was like I kind of didn't really know how to like deal with that. Because I was like, I should be mad. But instead of being mad, I'm just, it's just like a night where I was just like, yeah, man, can't deal with this. What are you going to do?
I don't know whether I'm not often predisposed to that kind of worry. Maybe I ought to try and engage in it. Might keep me on my toes a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
A little dose of despair.
Yeah.
Keep me going. I have wondered in the past whether there is something which is appealing about a radical politics which so thoroughly sets itself against the state of the world. There's something appealing about that, which I suppose lends itself to a particular mental disposition which is ill at ease with the world anyway.
Yeah.
By which I mean to say I've sometimes wondered whether my commitment to like socialism was basically just predicated my own lack of ability to cope with the world.
Yeah. Something must not make sense.
Yeah. And I suppose I haven't felt that in quite a long time because I've begun to grapple more seriously with what this kind of politics would be and would mean, which is quite fortunate, I suppose, or quite helpful. And I've also been doing a little bit of wrestling recently in terms of like, I suppose, the tendency towards blaming social circumstances or the state of the world or the system for one's own problems, I suppose, and the trying to find a middle ground between accepting there are social problems in the world and then also try not to let oneself be personally defeated, I suppose, by like said social problems, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I suppose there is an alternative, which in which one recognizes the problems in the world and sets oneself up as some kind of minimal agent
Yeah.
that might actually be able to do something about it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it's not about like taking personal responsibility rather than seeing things as collective, but rather you can take personal responsibility for solving the problems of the collective, perhaps in a collective as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Anyway, I don't know.
I mean, it's funny, right? Because it's like once you make the break with liberalism, where you kind of stop going like, where you stop using like bourgeois like statistics to justify your politics, if that makes sense. Where you kind of stop being like, oh, our GDP is so low here, but per capita in the socialist countries, like as soon as you stop with that, you're like, wait a minute, this is all kind of dumb. Everything needs to be changed. I need to stop arguing in terms of effing GDP. Like once you make that break, it is very freeing because you kind of can just be completely like, socialism would fix it. You know what I mean? Like it would be great. It's all just kind of capitalism. But then it is also like the other side of that coin is like, it's all capitalism.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it does feel. I was thinking something similar recently. Like, it does feel. Well, one is led to make a kind of like almost a Hail Mary argument, you know, like
Yeah.
or like you set the possibility of saving the world upon something so abstract as like imagining what changed circumstances of production would mean for the entire edifice of our social structure, kind of thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to just talking about redistribution, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Voting them out.
Yeah. And you can get a bit lost in the weeds of that and be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It would not. Yeah. It would be abnormal for one not to occasionally question the sanity of a commitment to such an abstract goal, I suppose.
And even to just like, I think you're right, just like a little bit of despair is like, that's probably good. Because if you don't have any despair, I don't know, what's going on? Like, are you a psychopath? Like, I don't know. So yeah, I think that's what I settled on. I'm back to just being pissed off about everything right now. Oh my dude.
Once again make our staunch commitment towards anger.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The bullshit about I don't know if you saw the photos of like that have been doing the rounds of like, you know, the Haitian asylum seeker is being rounded up by like, have you not seen it? It's so brutal. It's like rounded up by border cops, but they're on horses and they're literally using whips. And it's just like, it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's just like,
it's like the literal like slave catcher.
Exactly.
Sort of like,
it is like, under Obama, it was just like deport everybody.
Yeah.
And then Trump came along and he was like, but what about if we stopped legal immigration as well? And it's like, boy, thank God Trump's gone. And it's like, now we're still doing the same thing. It's like, it's, I don't know if we need to be reminded, but it is legal to seek asylum. So anyway, I'm pissed. Like, I didn't get that sad. Like, I'm so fucking mad, dude.
Yeah.
So that's good. I'm back to that, which is nice.
Yeah. Worth reiterating. There's no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker.
Yeah, exactly. Or an illegal person, Dan. Yeah. This is a very pro-immigrant podcast. I'll say that, government. Please. Please, government. Please. Well, Dan, I think you brought up something that we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, did I?
The idea of, I think we're getting closer to this idea of what can you do? You know what I mean? Because I think that's like a big question around once you start reading socialist theory or whatever, like, well, what can you do? And I think that last week, I myself was a little worried that perhaps there's nothing you can do. Perhaps it's all material circumstances, baby. And I think if you go back and listen to last week's episode, that's not where we end, because we had a discussion on the limits of political revolution, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in this week's reading, we get at least some suggestions of things that you yourself, royal listener, can do to help out the cause. And I really dug this week's reading, I think.
What did we read, Jack? What did we read?
Returning champion Hal Draper. He's back. He's at it again. Anatomy of a Micro-Sect, which is itself a micro kind of bit of writing. It was very good. 1973, and the original title of this document was a position paper by the Independent Socialist Committee, which was just kind of like a publishing company, I guess, that Hal Draper was involved with. And this basically sets out to analyze how in the New Left years, it's kind of like at the latter end, I suppose, why it's all just sects and why there's no big movement and what is a sect and how can we avoid being part of a sect. And once again, Hal Draper is very enlightening, I thought. Very good.
A great font of knowledge for our, I don't know, feeble minds.
Fountain. Gaunt King, too, we shall say.
Quite. Yeah, another excellent text. Yeah, like I guess at base, like an organizational one, right?
Yeah.
Or like a tactical text, starting with the state of American socialist politics in the mid-century, I suppose, but quite well applicable to any point in time post.
Yeah.
What, like 1930 or
Yeah.
something?
Sadly, more applicable
Certainly
now.
quite applicable today, although I feel like the prescriptions and recommendations made by Hal Draper in this text are certainly closer to being realized or formalized or put into action. They are the operating principle of far more organizations in present-day American politics than they were in his day, kind of thing.
Okay,
I think Hal Draper and his concept of the Marxist Center is definitely getting a new hearing and is very inspiring or essential to the organization of certain groups, particularly ones internal to the Democratic Socialists of America.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, definitely getting a hearing.
Yeah.
Which it certainly deserves to have. So it's a short text. Go out and look at it yourselves.
This is one I think we'll say, read it.
Read it. Yeah,
We generally say don't read it because, what are you going to do? Read it. But read this. I think it is very good. Easy to read and fountain of knowledge.
Yeah.
As you say.
So yeah, basically just starts out, what is the sect? What is the sect form? How did we end up in the position where Marxists and socialists in America, but in the UK as well, had basically just fashioned themselves into a series of sects, micro-sects.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know,
Micro
one person sects, I don't know. The remnants of splits upon splits upon splits, disagreeing on incredibly minor doctrinaire. He uses the phrase programmatic shibboleths quite a lot in this text.
I know, that rocked. I love that.
And how it's certainly detrimental to socialist organizing, but actually, even a number of times in this text, the efforts of these sects are, when they actually try and engage with the real workers' movement as it existed at the time, actually actively detrimental to the workers' movement as well, when they ought to be actually trying to help it. So
Actively cringe as well.
There's a lot of possibility for cringe from the sects. So yeah. Not productive as an organizational form, and how Draper rips them one.
Yeah, he does. And he does not exactly, well, as you say, he does not come out very nicely on the sect. And it's cool, too, because, like, with a lot of readings, it would have been, I think, expected if he went into this trying to talk about the sect and then just ripped it a new one and then did nothing. But I think, as we'll see, like, he does actually put forward, like, some suggestions for what might be an alternative form of a sect. I loved this bit so much. I just got to read these couple sentences. This is like maybe some of my favorite paragraph we've read so far. So this is under the heading about the road to an American socialist movement. It's kind of just like the introduction, but he says, since there are socialists in America, but no socialist movement, it is understandable that the socialists will say, let's go and form a socialist movement. All considerations argue for this obvious step, and there are no arguments against it. Well, that's good. I gotta just stop reading there.
There we go. It's agreed.
Thanks,
It's agreed.
Thanks, Hal Draper. Except one, he says. This is the fact, the historical fact, that no one can decide to make a revolution. Whatever is formed by fiat will turn out to be a sect alongside the other sects, even if it is the better kind of sect, which believes in not being sectarian. So this is, that rocks so much.
The non-sectarian sect.
Yeah. No, this one's non-sectarian. If you believe in that bullshit, you can't join. So we came across ideas similar to this last week, and we've been kind of coming across them more and more recently, this idea of, like, what you try and do on purpose to make a revolution probably won't work. And it's interesting, right? Because, like, this, I think I frame this as, like, this is probably obvious, but, like, in the dichotomy between the like concrete and abstract that you come across in like the first chapter of Capital, which I'll have you know we've read. This idea of like concrete labor being the stuff that you do, abstract being the stuff is like as a society does. And when you're a socialist and you're like, I want to go out and make the socialist revolution, that's kind of equivalent to like the concrete, right? Like that's what can I do? What can I do? I want to go out and make this thing happen. But you have to realize that like a revolution is something that's a bit more abstract. It's something that like has to happen, as we saw last week, like when the circumstances are correct. And then when those circumstances are correct, hopefully, fingers crossed, the world doesn't end by then, everyone will come together and kind of like there will be this revolution and everything's fine and we get socialism and it's fine. But again, what we're seeing here is that Draper's basically saying that like, while it is perfectly laudable to like want to go out and make the revolution, what will happen is if you do that, you're going to go out and make a sect. And he kind of gets to why that happens in a bit and explains kind of, a little bit more in depth as to why that happens. But that is kind of the framing device for this entire essay, is that like, don't just try and go out and try and make it happen yourself, because that's what everyone has done kind of. And that's where all of these sects come from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he does counterpose that idea of creating the movement by fiat. He counterposes that to another idea that we've come across previously, which is spontaneity. Just waiting for the movement to emerge from conditions kind of thing. And I suppose it's difficult, like the history of the... I guess the history of the socialist movement in general is replete with examples of intellectuals or non-workers, people who are sort of see themselves as almost outside of the movement history and sort of like they have the ideas and they're sort of waiting for them to be taken up kind of thing. And what's nice about this text is it reminds us that we all exist internal to the movement somewhere, somehow, and we all have a role to play or a potential role to play. So I guess his answer to spontaneity to some extent is we should never see ourselves outside of the movement and not in a position to act, however minorly, in pushing or creating or developing that movement. But at the same time, it's not about subordinating the movement to your will. So he's sort of like advocating for this middle ground between the resignation, I suppose, which is spontaneity, and also the primary role of the sect, which is to imagine oneself as the new central committee in waiting kind of thing.
In exile. I brought up cringe, but like kind of on a more serious note, like a lot of this does just kind of become cringe if that's what you try and do. Like if you think of, the classic like going to the people in Russia where it was like, we have all these ideas, let's just bring them to the factory workers and the peasants. And then they like went to like the local tavern in like, Siberia or whatever and started talking all this shit. And then the peasants just like called the cops because they're like, who the hell is this guy? What's going on?
Well, like neo-neurotics.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly.
This is the new left. Or like
exactly. It has its analog, as Draper's saying, and this is kind of what he's reacting against with this in American socialist history of like new lefties who were like, I can see what needs to be done. Let me go tell the common factory worker. And then, you go to the factory and like immediately your hand gets chopped off or something like that. And they're like, why would we listen to this guy at all? It's kind of something similar to that. And I mean, like, while what a lot of people might do isn't nearly as dramatic as like going to the people or whatever, there are kind of analogs that are a little bit more, I don't know, realistic, I suppose, in these ideas of like, I have my ideas. They're the right ones. I'm going to start my little sect and you can't join if you have different ideas, right? And then it just becomes infighting, and that's what a sect is. That definitely happens more often, I'd say.
I suppose in that instance, what you're doing is starting from the position of ideas and expecting to accrete a movement around your superior ideas rather than starting with a movement and then attempting to influence that movement in a positive direction, but always subordinating yourself to the movement rather than trying to subordinate the movement to you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it might be worth kind of skipping ahead a bit past, because he talks a lot about trade unions. He talks a lot about Iskra, actually. But I think it might be worth just to kind of round out his thoughts on sectarian ideas and stuff like this, just to say that, like, the reason that a lot of these sects have happened, like the thesis that he puts forward is, why is the American socialist movement just sects, is because there's no mass movement, right? He basically like comes out and says towards the end of the essay, like, without a mass movement, no matter what you're trying to do, it's just going to resort to political infighting. And he has that great line that you brought up before we started recording of like, I can't say these words, but the centrifugal force of like, spinning outwards from the center.
Centrifugal force.
Centrifugal, thank you. Of like the political infighting that will eventually rip a sect apart, or when you try and merge a sect together, that'll eventually, people have petty political infighting and that'll rip it apart. It's sometimes, if you have a mass movement, he says, it will be balanced out by the centripetal force, the other one, going towards the center of the common class struggle and of the common goals of the working class. So, I suppose these are ideas that we kind of came across when we talked to Cliff a little bit. But the idea of like merging these two things together, right? One might call it a bit of a merger formula. But Hal Draper here explains it in a lot more practical terms of just being like, the political infighting in a sect is just going to rapidly like rip it apart, but it can be held together by the mass movement if you have a mass movement. And the reason why none of these, why you only have sects in the American socialist movement is because there is no mass movement, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, we came across this in our first Hal Draper reading on the socialism from above, socialism from below. I don't think he specifically uses the phrase merger formula, but Hal Draper is saying that like Marx's great insight, the core and essence of Marxism is to say that Marxism is the merger of the socialist movement with the workers' movement, or like it's the effort to have the workers' movement adopt socialist aims, aspirations, and work toward a socialist outcome, I suppose. And the same is reiterated wholeheartedly here. You cannot have a meaningful socialist movement that doesn't orientate itself toward a mass movement, toward the workers' movement. And he quotes from Marx several times. I can't remember the explicit quote about Marx is far more committed to moving the workers' movement even an inch in the right direction is far more important than any amount of like programmatic unity or internal party maneuvering and this kind of thing. Like it's all about the movement and how you can move it in a positive direction. It's far more important.
Yeah. And in like a bit of a kind of a more of a game theory sense, he kind of brings up trade unions, right? Because he basically says that like trade unions kind of break, American trade unions at least, kind of break the sect socialist's brain a little bit, because they're like, wait a minute, this is the workers' movement, but it's being run by bureaucrats, and it basically is just for the aims of the bourgeoisie. Think like literally any American trade union alive today. But he basically says, like, you don't have to have that brain-breaking approach to trade unions. It's like, you can't, like, on one hand, you shouldn't just reject them entirely, because that's dumb. And this is, like, however milquetoast it is, this is an example of, like, the workers' movement, that there are trade unions or whatever, even if they're being run by bureaucrats or whatever. But on the other hand, you can't just give them complete support. So he basically argues, I guess, for, like, I think he calls it, like, I have it in front of me, but I'm just looking at words and they mean nothing. It's a loyal opposition, I suppose. Yeah. Which I really appreciate because, again, it's something that you can do and it makes sense.
Yeah.
But he's basically saying, be loyal to the trade union. You like trade unions. Don't be an idiot. You're a socialist. You like trade unions. But you need to be unwavering in your beliefs that these need to be used for socialism and the end goal of getting rid of wage labor and getting rid of capitalism, and not just like, hey, we got a 32-cent raise over the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's part of his political strategy, which is to say that you need in the US, the socialist movement needs to develop within the trade unions a substantive, like, progressive bloc, with a view to basically moving the trade union movement toward being or adopting a model of class struggle unionism rather than business unionism, which is what you describe. And he also, so when he's talking about the movement that he intends to engender, he talks about it being, when he's talking about the loyal opposition, he's kind of suggesting it's not necessarily loyalty to the bureaucracy, but to the actual aims of the union itself, kind of thing. Like, at least to the union form and the way it the way the workers represent themselves through trade unions, I suppose. Sort of loyalty to that activity and loyal to the workers. One of the times when he's criticizing the operations of some members of the New Left in their relationship toward trade unions and the workers is that they sort of go to help the workers, but they don't become workers themselves. They decide to volunteer for the trade unions, which is what the trade unions were kind of calling for, but they gradually become quite disillusioned with the trade unions, start to advocate for, I mean, he clearly seems to be talking as if this was a general trend, although he's talking in quite abstract terms, but they gradually become anti-democratic to some extent, begin to think that it's for them to tell the trade unions what to do kind of thing. Rather than promote and advocate for the members of the trade unions to make their own decisions and to actually enable the working class, I suppose.
Yeah, and he also just says that, like, another outcome of that is just that they, like, get so frustrated with the workers. He uses the example of farm workers. You kind of get the feeling he's talking maybe about, I don't know, a very specific union, but like, you know, if you're just some sect boy and you are like, I'm going to go do socialism by doing entryism into this farm workers union, one outcome of that is just you realize that these people are not receptive to like another bureaucrat telling them what to do. And, you know, then you get frustrated and you denounce them and you go, you know, this is not worthy of my time. You get I don't know too much about Hal Draper's life. It's hard to find, honestly, much about him. But like, you get the feeling that he has like experience with all of this stuff. And he's just writing about like that guy that he knew.
Coming back to trade unionism, I'm definitely guilty myself of in the past having adopted maybe what I'd call like a sort of ultra left attitude toward the trade unions, which is basically to just tar them all as being business unions, I suppose, charge them with being agents of de-radicalizing the working class, stabilizing capitalism, sort of negotiating with capitalists to maintain the capitalist system kind of thing, and have certainly in the past thought that trade unions were kind of a busted flush for that role that they had played in sort of de-radicalizing the working class or not representing working class aspiration. It's quite a nice schooling that one gets in this text when Hal Draper is talking about Marx and Marx's attitude toward the trade unions. He's sort of saying that there were certainly people even pre-Marx that had that similar disposition toward the trade unions. And he sort of explains Marx's sort of like pro-trade union stance in the light of this concept of kind of the merger formula, right? And like going to the place where the workers are and actually influencing the real workers' movement. Like, this is the place where workers have organized themselves. Why would you sort of seek to imagine some other organizational form that doesn't even exist, you know?
Yeah.
Whether it's going to materialize magically in the revolution or not, I'm not really sure. But like, I don't know. I'm definitely moved. Not that I was necessarily continue to still be an adherent to that ultra left position, but I was definitely moved by this text more toward at least like considering it a more legitimate argument to say this is where the workers are, so this is where one ought to be organizing, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean also like if you come across someone with that attitude and you're kind of trying to maybe talk a bit of sense to them, like it would make sense maybe a little bit for them to be like, well, I don't want to get so involved that I'm going to have to be a part of this loyal opposition, whatever. Like there is always too the idea that it's like, well, even if it is bureaucratic, like it is helping workers, like to a certain extent, obviously, right? Like in a reformist sense, of course, but like the only union that I have like actual concrete experience with through my family and through working on non-union jobs and union jobs is IATSE, which is like a very large union in Los Angeles, and it is basically like most of the crew workers and even like I think like screen actors too in film, and like the difference between a union job and a non-union job is like big. Like it's, you know, IATSE is no bastion of revolutionary activity, but like it helps a lot. So I guess all I'm saying is like, you know, you could kind of have this left attitude against unions, but even just like on a practical level, it's just like, okay, non-union jobs are like 18-hour days and they don't give you breaks and they give you McDonald's for lunch. Or you could have a union job, which like, yeah, it's reformist and it sucks, but also like, it's a bit better. You're only working 12 and you get a lunch and some breaks. You know what I mean? So.
And do you think people's experience, do you think your experience and the people that you were around was that unions are positive and they are to be held responsible for the fact that those jobs are better, kind of thing? Was it deliberately, clearly known, and did it move people to have a intentioned advocacy for trade unions? Maybe
I think I mean, the phrase union job and non-union job is like gets tossed around a lot, and if you have to do a non-union job, it sucks, and you know that it's because no one from your union is going to come around and be like, yo, what the hell, give them their breaks, or like this lunch sucks, or okay, they've been working X hours. But also like two things. I would say that's kind of a bit balanced out by the idea that like that union, like most unions, is pretty exclusionary. It protects its workers and it doesn't let many other workers in, and that's kind of changing a bit, I guess. Maybe just purely because of the demographics are completely changing in California, or have kind of completely changed. But also, like, you still got to pay union dues, and there are a lot of things that suck. And, like, this is kind of ammo for, like, explaining why perhaps you need to be part of the loyal opposition within a union, because it's like paying union dues kind of sucks. And also, like, yeah, you get health insurance and you get a retirement plan, but, like, kind of sucks. And you're constantly, like, at a risk of, like, pretty much everybody works under IATSE as an independent contractor, and like if you don't get enough hours, your medical plan can change or whatever, and that really sucks, and you can kind of blame the union for that, as you rightfully should. So I think like in terms of answering that question, like, yeah, it's definitely seen as a good, and you kind of need to be a part of the union if you want to have like a lot of the crew jobs that I've worked, but like there are some things that balance it out that people get frustrated with, and rightly so. And I suppose that's because there is no one in that union that's like, yo, but what if this was an organ for class power, though? Like, what if this was a workers' party? You know what I mean? So I suppose that's just what Draper's saying.
Yeah. I guess, that what the union means and doesn't mean is very much like baked in and not open to change kind of thing.
It is.
Nobody's like...
It's concretely what you're
nobody's
getting.
working to push the bounds of what it even means for a trade union to be a trade union.
Yeah, it's such a big bureaucracy that it's like, change the union? What?
Yeah. And I suppose also in this country, and particularly in the US, there is so much like trade union and anti-trade union legislation that what a trade union can and can't do is so heavily dictated by in the States it's mostly state law, right? But like so I mean I guess for a positive step for trade unions would be an actual willingness to break the law potentially, and what they were willing to do. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean absolutely. And also just like the union isn't going to appoint radical people on its own, you know what I mean? And nobody wants to really get involved with it. But it's also funny because, like, at the end of the day, too, like, there are Trump guys who are, like, pro-IATSE, of course, because they recognize... But then, again, I mean, this just gets into a whole other question of, like, how can you have that dissonance in your brain of, like, being an anti-union chud, but being part of a union and liking your union? Like, I think that's kind of just comes out of the way that unions operate in America now, is not really being, like... industrial in any way. They're very much like exclusionary, and whatever. That's a different conversation. But loyal opposition, I suppose, is what I'm coming away from this from. Yes, you should be, if you're in IATSE, make people communists.
Yeah, I suppose I do wonder whether, now that I've just said, like, trade unions to break the law, but like maybe that's not what to advocate for, but rather doing that work of building a group around yourself in your trade union who, I don't know,
get it,
get it, recognize themselves as socialists and recognize what the socialist project is, and recognize where the trade union can and can't help toward the socialist project as it stands at the moment, but you are ready and able to be members of a new organization or a new radical movement in formation, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, that kind of gets into his answer to, like, the what can you do, right? And it is pretty much exactly what you're saying. I'm going to kind of chop up what he says, but he basically says, from the point of view of the individual socialist who wants to do something. I don't know why I needed quotes there. I think that's kind of funny. We would summarize our suggestion as follows. And I'm chopping this up, but he just basically says, crystallize a circle of co-thinkers around you wherever you are and make contact with a political center that makes sense from your own point of view. We'll get into kind of what a political center is, but I think while we're on the subject, we should kind of talk about what it means to like crystallize a circle of co-thinkers. Like this can kind of mean anything you want, but I think basically what he's saying is like at your job, wherever you are, in every job I've ever had, the best people to work with and the people that you enjoy working with are the ones that are like a little bit subversive, but in a kind of like communal way. Like we joked about this a while ago about like, I was complaining about somebody shirking work and you were like, yes, shirking work should be done, as a group. And it's like, that absolutely makes sense because it's like at every job I've had, like you find ways around things that aren't like the correct way of doing it. And you find better ways of doing things and you find ways to not do things that are, effing stupid. And so like, I suppose kind of a bit of what Draper's saying is like, these subversive attitudes exist and like, it would not take a monumental amount of effort to steer these in the direction that could potentially be useful should a socialist revolution kind of come around, And he actually kind of says it's necessary, I guess.
I feel like when I'm at work, I like to recognize and advocate for those kind of like sort of collective solutions or recognitions of collectivity or solidarity or common interest. What I have never done, and I guess what Draper is advocating that I ought to do, is actually attach the word socialist to some of that work, and actually build a group around oneself of co-thinkers moving or working toward an explicit understanding of politics, which is the daunting thing, right? It's funny. Like I feel like I'm sort of comfortable finding in my everyday life co-thinkers, but how much does that connect to a mass or a mass movement? Initially, he talks about creating a circle around oneself in your workplace, and then he does extend that to sort of school or university or what have you. And then later on, he sort of talks about your efforts to influence a mass movement. And so it sort of opens up the space for that circle that one is building around oneself to be in some movement of persons that's not necessarily one's workplace, I suppose. And I guess it's an open question for me, where is and isn't the appropriate space or the tactically astute space to be creating one circle. But I guess it's in the actual operation of your life and not just a sort of like intellectual circle of people that you find not particularly connected to the sort of like material substance of the world. I'm just jumbling words together now, but you know what I mean?
Know what you mean, yeah.
Because otherwise you're just building a sect, right? Like, there's an extent to which one would just be building a sect rather than building a group of co-thinkers that were actually connected to a movement.
Yeah. Well, he's definitely not advocating you like go up to somebody you work with, grab them by the lapels and be like, when was your Kronstadt? Right? Like he's not asking you to like make everybody happy.
Yeah. Well, that's how you work out who your allies are, who your co-thinkers are.
It was Kronstadt? Get out. I mean, I think, and this is what I've had minor success with, more so just because I'm like constantly complaining at work. You don't necessarily have to use the word socialist or communist. It would be extremely helpful if you did. Maybe sometime down the line you do. I think Workers' Party is very helpful, especially in the American kind of theater. But like, it's really helpful to explain to people, I think, the issues with wage labor. Because like, if you just say to people like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we got rid of wages and money? They're going to be like, whoa, like, oh, that's kind of insane. But like, if you can like, okay, when we started this podcast and I was working at the warehouse, it was very easy to just be like, God damn it, I wish we had more autonomy from our bosses. You know what I mean? Like, they're kind of crazy, right? And like, we know how to do our jobs a lot better than them. And it's a lot better when they aren't around, so we can just sort things out. And then it was very easy to be like, hey, doesn't it suck that they get, 30 minutes on either side of our shifts of free labor and they just don't pay us for it? Doesn't that really suck? And like everybody, no matter who you're talking to, everybody is open to that stuff wherever you work, right? And so like if you kind of just like can get people interested in that and get people interested in like, well, why does that happen? It isn't just because our boss is a jerk, right? Like our boss is a jerk, but also like not every boss on the planet could possibly be a jerk, right? That I think is the better way to go about it. And then like, well, way down the line, if someone's interested in learning about Kronstadt or whatever, like that's kind of when you get to it. But yeah, I think it is better to root, and I guess this is what he's saying, right? Is root what you're saying in the concrete lives of everybody around you, and just there's an implicit like, don't be a freak, don't be weird, don't be like, the Lenin cap wearing person at the student union. Like you don't want to be that guy. You know what I mean? Like we've all come across, trots. Don't be them. Be normal. Be cool, and like. Yeah, I don't know.
People who've already built a sect of one.
Yeah, exactly. Although there is the killer sentence, you are the smallest unit political center there is. It's like, oh.
Yeah, I kind of felt like that made allusions to cybernetics, even if the overlap wasn't clear or worked out. It had these kind of like
recursion.
Yeah. Sort of poetic allusion to it, at least, which was nice.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose we should get into kind of talking about what he meant by political center, right? Because he says the point number 2 is make contact with a political center that makes sense from your point of view. And in this, he talks a lot about Iskra and he talks about Lenin. I guess if you don't know, that was classic commie newspaper that Lenin was on the editorial board of. Political center here in Draper's sense, this is a bit outdated, but it kind of just means newspaper, it seems like, or some kind of literary like public publishing house or something, which makes sense because it's kind of he's practicing what he preaches. But it's basically like you need some way of having a center, right? And he doesn't mean like, I don't know, we were talking a little bit about how it kind of took us a second to understand what he means by political center. It doesn't mean like, neither left nor right, horseshoe theory, baby. Like what he means is like an actual center for your activities. And he kind of uses a newspaper to explain like, this is a great way of doing it because you can publish articles on a bunch of different things. You can have ideological consistency and you can kind of point to the newspaper and be like, here's this is what we think. Isn't that great? Would you like to also think these things too? Here, yeah, you join the newspaper or whatever, I guess. But yeah, I suppose the reason he says there need to be those two things is like talk with people that you know and crystallize co-thinkers or whatever, and also have a political center is because there needs to be some kind of base that you use for your ideological grounds, right? And the newspaper is just one of those.
Yeah, he kind of talks about it as if it's a kind of aid to your activity kind of thing. You gain like propaganda materials or, I don't know, some direction in action, some kind of training. And there is a section in this when he's actually quite he celebrates or at least doesn't condemn a particular activity of the sect, which is expressly this, right? They do actually like take in people with and sort of like nurture their potential, nurture their ideas, educate them, but also give them a kind of practice to adopt and adhere to ways of relating to people, a kind of training.
Sure.
And he does say that like if the political center that seems most expedient to you is a sect, there's no reason for you to sue association just because they are a sect.
Yeah.
He basically says don't join, because if you join and you have some opportunity, if you're in a position to vote on or determine in some way their doctrinaire positions, then you're at the same time, you have to adhere to those positions, and your possibility to propagandize or to work might be curtailed by the necessity to adhere to those programmatic shibboleths. But if it's advantageous to have that association, then have the association. Why not? And no, there's no reason why it has to be one sect, right? It could be multiple if you want to engage with people in that way. It's certainly advantageous to be around people who have the same ideas, and you can develop your ideas and your thinking in that kind of forum, and also to take guidance and resources back to your own collective.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Yeah, and I think this was practiced to at least like some success. I honestly don't really know how much success, so I'll just say great success.
Why not?
with the United Farm Workers, and when Chavez and all those lads were beginning kind of, this quest for like one large union to, help basically just help out like every farm worker in California. There was like a paper that got at least some of it started, right? And like, it's really easy to relate to people's lives in that way when you have like a mixture, I suppose, of like theories on the way things should go. One might call that socialism. And also just like directing that to concrete examples of people's lives. Like, damn, did you see that like Billy got his leg crushed because the forklift wasn't following this protocol? That really sucks. It would make it better? No, not if we had like, stricter bureaucracies and like pumped more money into the union. What would make it better is like, damn, maybe if we could actually run these things. And I kind of don't really know how to apply this to now. I suppose it's just like the internet, right? But then it's like, that's a bit of a technological determinist standpoint, because it's like the internet and like Twitter specifically is like the ultimate collection of one person's sects, right? So I don't know how you'd kind of have this. I suppose it's just like the easy answer is an online newspaper, but yeah, I don't know. It needs to be something, I guess. I still like the idea of a physical newspaper. I think that's cool. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
Nice, like maybe like a nice like quarterly journal, something like that. Something that appeals to my sort of like esthete hipster, sort of like having nice books, having nice things, kind
leather bound.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know about the leather, but. Should we talk about Lenin? I want to talk about Lenin.
Yeah, we can. This definitely ties into Lenin.
He basically says that Marx was violently opposed to the sect form, and then he somewhat, I suppose, potentially controversially, but not really, says that Lenin was as well. And that's quite surprising to some people who have adopted the kind of like mainstream understanding of what Lenin and Leninism is, and particularly for people who have experienced like Leninist or Marxist-Leninist sects, because he sort of suggests that the sects which model themselves as Leninist have actually adopted the sort of the perception of Leninism and Bolshevism that's actually propagated by anti-Bolshevik, sort of like even anti-communist historians.
Lenin out of context.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what Lasley's description of the general perception of what Lenin's position is.
The textbook reading.
The textbook interpretation. Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like the Leninist sects have adopted the textbook interpretation of Lenin's sort of political strategy, which is actually nothing to do with what Lenin actually advocated. It's the one that says Lenin was this doctrinaire thinker who set out to build a sect around himself, almost like build a cult of personality, was like ultra hostile to other groups, sought to take over and lead against its will almost, or to manipulate the workers' movement, to create revolution by fiat. All of those things that we've just seen the sect described as are usually attributed to Lenin's politics, but actually were nothing to do with Lenin's politics as well. If one reads or listens to Lasley's big book on Lenin and what is to be done, he quite clearly demonstrates, in my view, I guess, that Lenin was very much in line with the mainstream of social democratic politics as it existed at that period of time. And the way that Hal Draper describes Lenin's politics is to say that, or Lenin's strategy, I suppose, is to say that although he built around himself a centre, a Marxist centre in the form of the publication Iskra, although he built around himself a centre which advocated for a particular series of positions, it was never adherence to those positions which determined whether one was or wasn't allowed in the movement.
Yeah.
The socialist movement was always intended to be pluralistic and multi-tendency, and then the various political centers were designed to vie for influence over the mass movement, not in a manipulative way, but in a way which was, how do we actually guide it to success? You know?
Yeah, hegemony, basically.
Yeah. Whereas the sect model kind of takes the doctrinaire positions and makes it a prerequisite for membership of the movement and has to agree with the doctrinaire positions, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was never Lenin or Riskra's position. And well, Hal Draper says that it was the right that, I mean, obviously, like, the German Social Democrats did split eventually. Hal Draper says that it was the right that split. I'm not entirely sure whether he's talking about the split in the Social Democrats or whether he's talking about the split of 1914 with the outbreak of war. But if one reads or listens to the final chapter of Lenin Rediscovered, it is shown that the people who did the most vociferous misrepresentation of their opposition was the Mensheviks and the right in their portrayal of Lenin. Lenin never made any effort to like misrepresent people's position, but everybody was misrepresenting Lenin all over the place, kind of thing. I'm willing to be an advocate for at least the idea that Lenin was the pluralist, was the one for open discussion and debate, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point to say that too, right? Because it's like this is again what we talked about when we talked with Cliff, was this idea of like someone will have hegemony, and like it isn't a sect if you have ideas. You know what I mean? Like you can still have ideas and disagree with people and like only kind of want your people to believe one thing, but like it still needs to be a pluralist movement. It's like exactly what you're saying. Like it is okay to have your own beliefs and want that to be the set of ideas that gets attached to the workers' movement, but like at the same time you can't like close the movement off entirely, because it's like you aren't like the gatekeeper of the movement, right? Like,
yeah, the first line of this, Hal Draper says that sect is a particularly sort of obscurantist phrase, I guess, and it's quite often associated as being a cuss word, which is particularly quaint. But it's what you were just saying sort of resonates with that idea that like quite often if you end up attacking someone or attacking the positions of a grouplet, you are accused of being sectarian, when in this context that isn't what it means to be sectarian. Just simply criticizing people is not sectarianism, kind of thing. It's only when you seek to exclude them from a right to be in the movement, I guess, that it becomes problematic.
And that's why that's all you see now, right? Is all you see is people infighting and like goddamn anarchists, goddamn Maoists, goddamn this, goddamn that, when like nobody has any idea what any of those words mean, and like it doesn't matter at all because there's no large movement going on. Relentless criticism is still a good thing, though, right?
Yeah. But without the centripetal binding force of actually being part of an active movement, it is unsurprising that ruthless criticism tears people and groups apart rather than binds.
And I like the idea too that he was like, don't think this kind of like political infighting just will stop existing even in the perfect circumstances. Like it will, and that's okay, and that's actually good, right? But it's like, the only thing that can really attempt to stop that or attempt to make everything so cohesive that it doesn't just fly apart is that mass movement.
Yeah, because the perfect program and ideological purity are not the things which make revolutions.
Exactly.
It's the sort of like messy activity of history that one can't really predict or direct. But it's about building the most able and most resilient movement that's able to act proactively when the circumstances emerge.
It's about doing your best.
Yeah.
This is almost like a self-help text. It's like, get out there and do your best, kiddo, and don't exclude anybody.
And it's worth saying, I guess, after all that talking about Lenin, is that like Hal Draper says explicitly he's not advocating for a pure adherence to the Lenin model or the Iskra model or the Erfurt model. That's a reference to the Erfurt program, which is the program of the German Social Democrats. Sorry. But what he is saying that, like, as you said before, a revolution has never been, or a revolution has never been made. Sects cannot go out and make a movement. The only model that's ever actually been demonstrated to work is this model of pluralistic schools of thought, which, on an individual level, embed themselves in the real lives of people and in the actual movement of social life.
Yeah.
Supported by a never increasing intellectual understanding of what has to be done, I suppose. And as you say, the winning of hegemony in a movement by a particular set of ideas such that that movement is able to act in a coherent way when the time comes.
Yeah.
That's the only model that's ever worked.
Yeah.
He compares it to the sort of like the model of the sect, which is one of accretion, right? We hope that we start off as a micro-sect and we collect a few more people and we become a real sect, and eventually we
pass out
press
enough
the
newspapers.
threshold into being legitimately a movement and a mass party kind of thing. But every sect imagines that they're going to be the one that becomes the mass party. And when we talk of like building a party, we don't intend to start with a name and a badge and a national convention or something.
Yeah.
It's about building the movement first, and the movement demands or develops itself into a party because it needs that kind of formation and unity and collectivity and structure. It's not about starting with the party and being like, right, Jack and I are going to go out and, I don't know, win the next election.
Well, we are going to do that.
We are going to do that, but like, it's another thing entirely.
Yeah, it's also definitely important to say, I think you hit the nail on the head about like these little like crystallized circles of co-thinkers will kind of mean nothing without a political center, and we've kind of gone over that, but like vice versa is also true. Like the political center will mean absolutely nothing if there aren't people that are involved and you're actually like involved with people's lives, right? It's like if you were to put a percentage on like, you know, how much of your co-thinking circles of crystallized thought or whatever, the people that you talk to should be about like doing communism and, hey, read my newspaper, versus like, hey, how can we make things better and how can we improve our lives and what can we do? Hey, we're working class, but like, you know, what can we do to like make all of this better? It would be like 90% the latter, right? Like it would be mainly the latter. Because if it were kind of to be anything else, it would be a little cringe. You know, you'd basically just be like the Stalinist being like, communism, dude. Mm-hmm. But also, like, I say that, but like, it's going to be a bit embarrassing. Like, especially if you use the word socialism or communism, but like, it is much better to do that than to do nothing or to just repeat like democratic bullshit, right? That everyone's always heard. Because it's like, you know, I've had to come to terms with this. It's like, it is better to embarrass yourself and say stuff that nobody's heard before that will get them thinking than doing nothing, right? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. We have to, and I don't know how to do this, but people do it. People are doing it.
All right.
You have to commit yourself to meeting people's needs, and you have to make yourself indispensable to that activity. And then you can try and sell them your newspaper. Yeah. But first,
a subscription.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't start with trying to sell someone your newspaper and be like, here's where all the ideas are.
Yeah.
Then come back to me when you're ready to make revolution.
Yeah, come back to me when you've read Capital.
Yeah.
Because I have. Yeah. And I mean, sectarianism also just breeds this like intellectual superiority, and you completely lose touch with what socialism is, which is making people's lives better, right? It's like if you're not doing anything to make people's lives better, then it's like, fuck off. You know what I mean? It's like this idea that I've got to come across with a lot of people of like, you want to give all power to the people, huh? Well, what about the dumbass Winston Churchill quote of like, you know, the greatest argument against democracy is like an average conversation with like the average voter or whatever. Like, sectarianism breeds these ideas that like you yourself are better than these other people, and like first of all you're not, and like secondly, if you don't believe that, or like if you do believe that, then like socialism isn't possible. Like if you don't trust people's inherent capabilities to better themselves and to run their own lives, I will gatekeep and say that you are not a socialist. Like, period.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It can't work if you don't believe that. So
yeah, there's a point in this where he says the sect form is the sort of truest political expression of what he calls like neo-Stalinism, but he's basically talking about like those sects which imagine themselves inserting themselves as the leadership of the movement kind of thing. Which is we've come across this idea, right? It's basically Jacobinism.
Yeah.
Like the goddamn Jacobins are active again. I mean, we joke that there aren't any. Well,
they're back.
No. We joke that there aren't any Blanquists, but like the
But they're kind of old
Blanquists have
Blanquists.
become Jacobins,
Exactly.
and the Jacobins still exist.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone is kind of a Jacobin.
We've evolved in our position from everyone's a liberal.
Like the
to
Fabians
everybody's
are
a Jacobin.
basically just Jacobins,
Yeah.
and like I don't know, the Maoists are kind of just Jacobins. I don't know, whatever. Also, I just want to say too, none of those. If you meet someone who calls themselves a Maoist, like, or someone who calls themselves like an ML, as much as we joke, it's like no one's that. It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
like, come just shake these people and be like, that isn't what you are. Like, yeah, I don't know. What are you gonna do? Other than me, I'm a Maoist. Speaking of Maoism, how about that reference to The Guardian and Paul Sweezy's monthly review? I realize now that that was not The Guardian of today. Because I was like, what was going on in the 70s? It's like, wow, that's weird.
Yeah, what was the Guardian's US wing doing?
There's a guy who thinks that his political center is The Guardian.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, that point, isn't it? Because, like, sort of jokes aside, I guess, like, this structure that he's describing could be applied to any particular system kind of thing. Like, monthly review press is described as a political center.
Sure.
Now he's just talking about developing a Marxist center.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a different thing.
Yeah. And if any of those people who wrote for Monthly Review actually talked to people instead of just being gross little mole people, that's a joke. I don't know. I'm sure they're very nice.
I've read some good monthly review books.
Yeah. Monthly Review's good.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, it's all good. If it's socialist, it's
yeah.
good.
If-
I'm going to disagree with everybody, so I'll just call it good.
Don't reject it as a political center. If it's advantageous to you, then go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Again, so I really like this coming across. What can you do? And also, it was a little bit more like, I like things that aren't just like full on attack mode. It's a little bit like, it's attack mode, but it's also like, there are sects because there cannot not be sects. Like, there have to be sects right now because there's no movement. So don't hate everybody.
It's basically a law of nature.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Left calm.
organizations will spin themselves apart if they're not being spun together again.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hal Draper, was this? So we read this. We read Socialism from Socialism from Below. We read it. Is this?
We read the text on the Dictatorship of the Proletariat. It was also him.
Yeah, so this is our third. Yeah.
Third installment of reading small essays by Hal Draper that are all excellent. Send us your favorite Hal Draper essay.
Yeah, please. This is a Hal Draper podcast now. This is Hal Draper's Political Center. Hal Draper approved. If anyone is still listening this far into the episode and has listened all the way to the end of several other episodes, you'll know that Dan and I have talked about Warhammer 40k Kill Team. It's here, folks. We pulled the trigger. We did it. And maybe by Christmas we'll play a game.
Yeah, I think it'll happen sooner than that. I mean, it'll take us that long to read the rules.
Exactly.
Maybe it'll drive us back toward capital, right? Trying to understand the rules for Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team.
Yeah, what are these rules? The rules for capitalism.
Yeah.
So yeah, folks, that'll be fun.
I think we're gonna go and crack a beer.
Yeah.
And clip some guys from some sprues.
Clip some sprues, folks.
And have some plastic glue.
Exactly.
Have a good time.
No ventilation. Folks, if you're working on Warhammer 40k models, it's a liberal bourgeois lie that you need to have ventilation. That's not true. Please have ventilation. All right.
It's been fun.
It's been very fun. This has been great.
Yep. Thanks for listening, everyone. I've been Dan. This has been Auxiliary Statements.
Thank you all very much. We'll see you next week, as per usual. I've been Jack. Goodbye.
Bye.
The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you like this song, you can check it out and much, much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. Be sure and follow us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you liked what you heard, be sure and tune in next week for some more commie discussion. Till next time.